Looking back in the UFO archive reveals a still unexplained and devastating alien attack on the Brazilian island of Colares over a 3-month period in 1977. The late NASA astronaut Edgar believed that extraterrestrials are generally well-meaning. However, this bizarre, unprovoked blitz from sea and air was blatantly hostile and cost lives. In 1977, the island of Kalaris in Brazil was the location of a spate of UFO sightings, which were officially investigated by government authorities. The investigation, named Operation Saucer, was commenced into a terrifying series of reported incidents in that year, when residents in the city of Kalaris claimed to have not only witnessed flying craft, but to have also been attacked by them. Bright objects of varying shapes, sizes and colours were reported to have been flying at low altitudes, only a few metres above the tops of trees, and firing light beams at people on the ground beneath them. All manner of UFOs were observed, some large, some small, variously shaped like saucers, cigars, barrels, some luminous, others not. Motherships were also sighted several times, some with a row of lighted windows. The smaller craft were released from them via a kind of cockpit which would open up in their lower section. The UFOs usually arrived from the north every day, from the sky, and it was also reported sometimes from underwater. The onslaught of the visitations lasted over months. Regularly, a number of the island's inhabitants were targeted by the craft, beaming strange lights at them, and many were badly hurt. Several witnesses stated that they were able to observe the beings piloting the craft and described them as no more than 3 to 4 feet tall with wrinkled greenish skin or clothing. While there is plenty of room for skepticism at these sightings, what separates them from the usual glimpses of UFOs in our skies are the numerous and recurring injuries that people suffered. The powerful light beams emitted, even passing through someone's metal car roof and a house roof, gave off intense shafts of radiation which caused puncture marks and lesions. Some of those targeted individuals reported to local media at the time that the strange weapon immobilized them like a heavy weight pushed against their chest. A report into the experiences of the victims stated that the beam was about 7 or 8 centimetres in diameter and was white in colour, although sometimes red, green and orange were also seen. The testimony of those targeted was that the beam never hunted for them but struck them suddenly. When they attempted to scream, no sound would come out, although their eyes remained open. The beam contained heat, being almost as hot as a cigarette burn. Dr. Waleed Sekem Cavallo was a medic who worked in a healthcare unit in the area at that time. Describing the injuries of victims, she wrote that all of them had sustained lesions to the face or thoracic area. The lesions appeared to resemble radiation injuries, beginning with an intense reddening of the skin in the affected area. Later on, the patient's hair would fall out and the skin would become black. At this stage, there was no pain, only a slight warmth. Dr. Carvalho had also noticed small puncture marks in the skin. She said that overall, those affected were men and women of various ages, not indicating any pattern in those targeted. However, in 1997, the lead investigator reported that many more women were targeted, usually sustaining puncture marks on their left breast. He told UFO magazine that out of every 10 people attacked, 8 would be women. As well as the many injuries, at least 2 men and 1 woman were known to have perished, while a later French report gave the initial number of fatalities as 5. Many other victims succumbed to their injuries over the next few years. The sources quickly became known as chapa chapa, which means sucker sucker, a reference to the suspicion that blood was being extracted during the attacks. With increasing reports of sightings and incidents where people were injured, panic soon began to set in. Women and children began to leave the area, while local men stayed behind to look after their homes and possessions. Those who remained lit bonfires to keep guard at night, letting off fireworks and clanging tins whenever they saw the chuppa-chuppas approaching. Others stayed locked in their homes. It was later commented that the more noise people made with the bonfires and fireworks, the closer the craft came. As the Brazilian government could find no reasonable explanation as to what exactly had caused the so-called UFO attacks, the Brazilian Air Force, or FAB, was then tasked with investigating what was occurring on the island. Operation Saucer resulted in the compilation of a 2,000-page military report featuring 500 photographs and 16 hours of film footage that the FAB investigators reportedly witnessed with their own eyes. Ufologist Daniel Rebisso-Guise, a biologist and health professor, later researched this strange and frightening phenomenon. He claimed in his book on the subject, entitled Extraterrestrial Vampires of the Amazon, that several military personnel suffered nervous breakdowns, while others sustained serious mental health impairment during the course of the investigation. The documents stayed classified until a few pages were released in 2004, showing drawings and photographs of what the military saw. Bright cylindrical lights are shown in the photographs, echoed by similarly shaped objects drawn by witnesses on the island at the time. Despite this, the final report never explicitly stated that UFOs or aliens were officially the cause of the sightings and injuries. However, high-ranking officials in FAB reportedly informed a group of ufologists in 2004 that they had discreetly been studying the phenomenon of UFOs since the mid-50s. Dr. Carvalho, who treated over 80 islanders for their injuries after the attacks, later stated that she was compelled by FAB to lie to victims about their injuries and to tell them that they had been hallucinating. She denied any kind of mass hysteria or visual hallucinations and also claimed to have seen a UFO herself, describing the bright metal of the cone-shaped or cylindrical object. She was vindicated when, in 1997, Captain Hollander, who was the commander of the operation, gave an interview to UFO magazine where he related how terrified his men became during their investigations. He recounted eyewitness statements reporting residents waking up to beings wearing protective clothing who were firing coloured beams at their heads. Several officers actually observed strange lights emerging from and diving back into coastal waters around the area, leading some to speculate that this was the location of a UFO base. Astonishingly, Captain Hollander disclosed 3 personal encounters with the visiting aliens and showed what appeared to be a subcutaneous implant inserted into his arm. 3 months after doing the interview, Captain Hollander was found deceased in his home, seemingly by his own volition. Further research undertaken by Guise and others sheds a quite shocking light on this aggressive onslaught on the lives of people of Kalaris. The researchers collected many accounts of people surprised by an intense glare while asleep, waking to feel a paralysing heat and piercing needles, then being left with burns and an exhaustion lasting days. The researchers determined the zone of action as the north of Brazil, with the sightings frequently occurring on the edges of rivers and of the Atlantic Ocean, a place of relative geographical isolation with distant and small population centres. The UFOs usually surfaced at night, but were not always coming from high up, then disappearing into the sky. The small objects behaved like flying probes, emitting luminous beams and targeting people, preferably when they slept. Some witnesses stated that the probes seemed to be looking for veins. The burns they inflicted did not seem accidental, and there was a strong suggestion from the prick marks left that they were removing blood from their victims. Dr. Carvalho had perceived her patients as showing symptoms of blood loss and found they lacked hemoglobin in her clinical tests. The conclusion reached by researchers was that the UFO operation was a mission of great scope, with the possible objective of research and biological manipulation of humans. French astronomer and computer scientist Dr. Jacques Vallée travelled to South America to study UFO close encounters like the Colares Attack that have resulted in the death or injury of witnesses. He concluded that the fact that none of this material has ever been seriously examined by professional scientists due to the narrow limits of society's preconceptions reflected in the government cover-up is staggering. The Kalaris attacks remain amongst the most baffling and mystifying occurrences in the history of unexplained phenomena.